Every day, 3,000 people will take their own lives and 60,000 people will attempt to. Every 40 seconds, someone will commit suicide. Suicide is both a complex and upsetting problem that affects many people. Throughout this school year, I have researched the many aspects of suicide, and I will present you with my research in this video. Suicide contagion can be most simply defined as the theory stating that one person's suicide can influence others to take their own lives. Some believe suicide contagion tends to take place due to the over-sensationalizing of suicide in the media. One researcher said it can be especially harmful when the media goes into detail about how a person died, uses dramatic images, or glamorizes a person's death. Others say that suicide contagion happens on much smaller scales. One researcher stated that suicide happens within clusters and that when one person in a community takes their own life, then others around them are more inclined to do the same because they see suicide as being a more realistic and viable option. These suicide clusters are more common among certain age groups. Suicide clusters are most common amongst teens ages 15 to 19 years old. A report stated that the relative risk of suicide following exposure to another individual's suicide was 2 to 4 times higher among 15 to 19-year-olds than among any other age group.
So, Dr. Phil, one of the things that I think is most intriguing in reading up on suicide is this whole concept of suicide contagion. Tell me what that is and how legitimate that concept of suicide contagion or copycat suicide is.
Well, it is sadly a very real and legitimate concept. There are ethical guidelines for the media in how to cover that sort of thing, because the things that you typically see on the news, the memorials where people come and bring flowers and the heartfelt interviews and everyone talking about them, contribute to this copycat effect, because those that are trapped in a really bad place in their life and that maybe even remotely considering it, they look at that and say, wow, I would love for people to do that for me.
And in the past, we, and I say we meaning media, played a huge role in it, but now with social media, this whole idea of, I think, suicide contagion has really leapt off the page.
So the question is it appropriate to openly discuss suicide in school? Suicide can affect anyone. On one side of the spectrum, some people believe that discussing suicide may facilitate suicide and encourage suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Others believe that suicide is something that should be openly discussed. These people believe that openly discussing suicide in school can help vulnerable people gain courage and speak up about their own suicidal thoughts. It also allows the youth to better understand suicide. Since the highest suicide rates exist among 15 to 19-year-olds, openly talking about suicide could really help prevent it.
It's said often that there's so much stigma and taboo around suicide even today.
I'm a huge believer that the more you talk about anything and get something up on the table, the more you have to affect change.
The fear that I have heard is that if we talk about it, it will actually facilitate it, or it will bring it on. And that's not the truth.
We need to talk about this.
When you talk about suicide, it is by far probably the worst imaginable thing that you can even wrap your head around. So by not talking about it, it's almost like we're not validating that it could be a part of our lives.
Most people try to cover up the dark things, and we're trying not to.
Suicide really is, it's about an illness. Most people that choose to take their lives have some form of depression.
I feel that it needs to be talked about. I really do, because if you don't talk about it, like some people, like they just need to talk about it, and so if they do, it might help them, or it shows people that they're not alone.
They might feel that way, but to know that they really aren't. Of course, you can't change somebody's, you can't tell them how to feel exactly, but you can encourage them and give them hope. To know that there's resources, there's help, there's people that care, and to talk.
We do need to open up the lines of communication and say it's okay to have these conversations, because there are people that are hurting, and the more taboo it is, the less likely they're going to be talking about it and getting the help that they need.
There's people who want to help. There's, resources at the school, resources in the community. It just shows them that it's okay to talk about it.
It's very courageous to talk about it, to give it a voice, because that's what precedes the healing. That's what helps with the education.
Like some of the people that I've turned to, I never thought would have, understood, but then they ended up being, one of my most trusted friends.
We still need to be careful how we talk about it, because we're dealing with youth that are fragile and that are very impressionable. But we do need to open up the lines of communication and say it's okay to have these conversations.
Go to somebody, talk about it. Talking about it helps. Even though you feel awkward, when you're talking about it to somebody, they really aren't sitting there judging you. They just want to help.
There is a very evident correlation between bullying and suicide. Every day, there are thousands of kids and teens being involved in bullying. The National Crime Victimization Survey estimated that in 2013, about 2.2 million students were involved in some type of bullying. Bullying can be defined as repeated interpersonal behavior which is intended to do physical or psychological harm. Bullying is most common amongst children 11 to 17 years of age. Bullying can consist of consistent name-calling, teasing, taunting, inappropriate sexual comments, threats, and physical contact such as hitting, kicking, and pushing. These negative interactions can cause kids and teens alike to be more vulnerable to having depression and suicidal thoughts.
The last couple of days, we had heard that Tyler had his head shoved into a wall locker. They said he was a geek.
My concern is that you were making someone feel so uncomfortable that they didn't want to be in school.
I feel kind of nervous going to school because I like learning, but I have trouble with making friends.
They said he was a geek. Some kids had told him that he was worthless, to go hang himself. And I think he got to the point to where enough was enough.
Tonight, a tragic situation.
A Perkins boy, just 11 years old, believed to have been desperate enough to take his own life.
This is an awfully complicated and difficult issue.
Kids will be kids, boys will be boys. They're just cruel at this age.
Here what we get is nothing's wrong, we didn't do anything, everything's fine.
They punch me, strangle me, take things from me, sit on me.
Give it to him hard!
He's not safe on that bus.
I've been on that bus. They are just as good as gold.
My voice is not going to fall silent. I will go to my grave until a difference is made.
We reached out to parents that have lost kids, parents of kids that are being bullied all over the world, and it took off like wildfire.
All it takes is for one person to stand up.
Be the difference. Go out and find that one child, that new kid standing over there by himself. Be willing to stand up for him.
Everything starts with one and builds up. Eventually we have an army.
If we all do it together, we will change the world.
Assisted suicide is when a person suffering from an incurable disease uses lethal medication provided by a doctor in order to commit suicide. There's a lot of controversy surrounding this topic because in most states, assisted suicide is illegal. On the other hand, some states, such as Oregon, have passed a death with dignity law. These laws allow terminally ill adults to legally receive aid in dying.
I hope for the sake of other American citizens, all these people that I'm speaking to that I've never met, that I'll never meet, that this choice be extended to you, that this right, that we mobilize, that we vocalize, that we start to talk about it. I decided to share my story because I felt like this issue of death with dignity is misunderstood by many people in our community and culture. And I really wanted people to understand that as I went through the process of being approved for death with dignity, that I felt very valued by my physicians here and very protected. There's no way I could have possibly been coerced into this. It's not a fear-based choice, it's a logic-based choice.
What's more important for a dying person than to have control at the end of their life? I'm hopeful that this will pass in every state in the Union.
Death with dignity is just a natural conclusion to a life with dignity.
Finally, what causes suicide? There's not just one cause of suicide. There are many different things that can cause people to take their own lives. Most of the time, mental illness causes people to commit suicide. The leading cause of suicide is depression. Most of the time, people who commit suicide have experienced some sort of traumatic event that has induced depression. Depression is not the only mental illness that can cause people to take their own lives. Suicide victims also tend to suffer from other mental illnesses such as PTSD.
When I was a freshman in college, I lost my brother Brian to suicide. Brian had been a very successful college student himself who was president of an a cappella group, sports editor of a newspaper, 3.8 GPA at an Ivy League university. And what we learned is that he started experiencing some pretty severe mental health issues in his freshman year of college. He started experiencing depression and hearing voices, some psychosis, and yet he hid it. He hid it from me. He hid it from his friends. He hid it from all of his teachers because he was scared. He was ashamed. He didn't know what this meant. He thought he was the only one who was struggling, and he thought it was his fault. Brian eventually went and sought help in his senior year. The hopelessness and the helplessness that accompanies depression had gotten to him, and had gotten to him so strong that just about a year later, in my freshman year of college, Brian died by suicide.
I think that we judge people a lot more unfairly if they have a mental health disorder. With mental health disorders, many people are uncertain what causes it. There's plenty of factors that can contribute to a mental health disorder, but because there isn't a single known cause, we tend not to speak about it at all.
The suicide number is just the very tip of the iceberg, and what you hope is that if you want to change that number, you've got to get much deeper into the problem and begin to change all of the things that are leading up to it.
I hope that after viewing this video, you are more informed about the growing issue of suicide. Together, we can make a change. Thank you for watching.